we deviate from ourselves? How long must we abandon ourselves? Since the moment we first chose to do so. We abandon ourselves in birth. And if we do not rejoin ourselves over the course of our lives, we rejoin ourselves in death. We must die to ourselves in order to be born. We must die to ourselves in order to be born. We must die to ourselves in order to be born.
The Teal Swan supporters. The Teal Swan supporters and the attitude.
Painful conditions of life can overrule that hardwiring, and instead we become motivated towards death. Feeling suicidal, having suicidal thoughts, attempting suicide, or committing suicide are all symptoms. They're symptoms of a deeper underlying cause, a root trauma or wound. It is that root trauma, that underlying cause, which needs our unconditional presence. Now, before we dive right into this episode, I want you to know that I'm going to be talking to you today not just from the standpoint of a spiritual teacher, but also from the standpoint of a survivor. Suicide is something that I've grappled with over the course of my life. Since I was a child, I've tried to commit suicide 4 times. Here's the thing. I'm not going to be like every other person and freak out right now because I'm so scared of death that I have to convince you that death or suicide is wrong. I'm not going to be like every other person and try to sugarcoat life for you by trying to sell you on the good points of it and tell you that your life is going to be all okay. Because the reality is, from where you're standing, you have absolutely no proof that that is true. I'm also not going to be like every other person and tell you you have to live. Why? Because I'm so scared of losing you and I need you around, and so I'm going to talk to you from that self-centered standpoint. Right now, you do not have proof the earth is anything but suffering, and you have no reason to believe that it will get better. And you're right to feel this way. You aren't wrong about your perspective. You know what else no one will tell you? Anyone in your circumstance would have probably killed themselves already. And you're right to feel this way. You aren't wrong about your perspective. You know what else no one will tell you? Anyone in your circumstance would have probably killed themselves already. There is nothing wrong with you for feeling this way. Right now you're in more pain than you can cope with. Suicide is nothing more than pain exceeding your pain-coping resources. A lot of what is making you want to kill yourself right now is the belief that on top of feeling so much despair, there is something wrong with you for feeling that despair. This causes you to feel more despair and ultimately turn on yourself. But from the standpoint of a spiritual teacher, I'm going to tell you, there is nothing wrong with you at all. Anyone in your circumstance, in your experience, would feel exactly the same way. Chances are if you even clicked on this video, even from inside this isolated torture chamber that you're living your life inside, there's an infinitesimal speck inside of you that actually wants life instead of death. So what I need from you is not even to want to live. You don't need to feel that way right now. What I need you to do is to try what I'm going to suggest in this. You have to know that you can always kill yourself tomorrow. You can always kill yourself in 5 minutes, in fact. It makes it so that suicide can be our safety net or our reset button that's always available to us. Pain does. Pain is designed to cry for attention, so we will focus upon it. Why? Because it's a red flag telling us that there's a problem. So what do we need to do? We need to expose the pain within us to the light of consciousness. Right now you feel like you're drowning in a vat of poison. What you have to do is to release that poison. You have to express the way you feel in any way that calls to you.
With the door closed, with a bunch of people around me, like, I'd say, okay, it was Graciela, Flavia, Jared, and I can't remember if it was just, and Teal actually. There's 4 people in a little room. I don't think Blake was in the picture. He was at work. But in any case, she had them surround me, and she's sitting there berating me for all of my shortcomings, telling me that I don't trust her, that I sent an energetic dagger by saying that, and then I'm questioning her integrity, and then she immediately jumps to telling me that I am suicidal. I said, what? I'm not suicidal. I've never been suicidal in my life. And she said, well, what if I told you you're passively suicidal instead? And I was like, I don't even know what that means. And she said, well, I can see your thoughts, and I can see your vibrations, and I can see everything about you. And I know that you're a match to breast cancer, and you have stomach ulcers. And she's just going on and on and on about how toxic of a person I am. And so by the end of this, she's like, you're just uncommitted to life, and you really need to get in your car. Seriously, she compared me to this woman that was her client who actually did kill herself, Leslie. And she compared me to her and told me that, I'm just like her, and I really need to decide whether or not I'm committed to life, and I should get in my car and go drive, and go get in your car, go drive, and I want you to go right now and go decide whether or not you're committing to life.
Interestingly enough, lost my first client to suicide this last year. And this was a woman who was absolutely miserable. I am talking every moment of her life was a nightmare. And so we had that very serious sit-down talk where we had to say, all right, we're either committing or not committing to life. Because every time I gave her a suggestion, she'd stop in 2 days doing the suggestion. So then we have to ask the question, do we really want this to work? And what's interesting is when she asked herself that question, the answer was no. I'm done. So there's nothing that any healer could ever do for that type of vibration, which is totally fine. She chose to commit suicide. Interestingly enough, it took her about 2 days before she was reincarnated.
At the time, I'm just like, well, the audacity to think that I'm going to actually kill myself because she told me to, for one. And then for 2, I'm like, man, she's really messed up. She's clinically insane, and there's no coming back from that. You lose all respect. And I just...
saying they even felt suicidal to go back home, so I think that's how you did a good job. Some people were saying they even felt suicidal to go back home, so I think that's how you did a good job. They even felt suicidal to go back home, so I think that's how you did a good job. People were saying they even felt suicidal to go back home, so I think that's how you did a good job.
Insane, and huge wake-up call for me. And after that point, all the trust factor was gone, because I realized, I had my suspicions. I could tell she wasn't right. I could tell things were Looney Tunes, but now I know she's clinically insane. And
If it's a close vibrational match to the question you've been asking, it also shines. It's almost like a light is ejected through just the energy field of the card itself. So there's absolutely no second guessing which card is supposed to be drawn. Open to life, reverse. Now I'm going to have to confront you on something. If you've drawn this frequency, by the way, is I'm open to the joy of being here. It's a vibration that I designed for people who are suicidal. So basically, if you have drawn this card, there is no exception. You are somebody who is frustrated enough with life that you toy with the idea of even being here.
I don't know. Planet Earth is okay, but I'm kind of over it.
Yeah, me too.
Are you?
Me too. If we're just being honest, me too.
Me too.
The very first thing is that we have to decide whether we're more committed to death or more committed to life. The reality is, if we're apathetic, we're actually committing passive suicide. Let me remind you that death is not wrong, committed to life. The reality is, if we're apathetic, we're actually committing passive suicide. Let me remind you that death is not wrong. Let me remind you that death is not wrong. Let me remind you that death is not wrong. Sometimes, which is what suicide is, it's essentially pushing the reset button on life. Sometimes that's the best option for some people. Which is what suicide is, it's essentially pushing the reset button on life. Sometimes that's the best option for some people. So sometimes, which is what suicide is, it's essentially pushing the reset button on life.
Reincarnation. Reincarnation is a Buddhist, Hinduist belief that the spirit, after it dies, goes on to inhabit another body and continues this cycle throughout the centuries and throughout eternity. This belief is another easy deception to fall into, because some people hear eyewitness reports of people finding supposedly dead bodies or things of that sort. And basically, we're bringing you a breakdown of why this is another shamble belief of Hinduism and Buddhism and the New Age movement.
66. A psychiatrist by the name of Ian Stevenson published a book entitled 20 Cases Suggestive of Reincarnation. And ever since, Buddhists such as the Dalai Lama have used Stevenson's work to try and convince people that reincarnation is literally true. I'm going to talk about just a few of the serious problems with Stevenson's work. Straight away from the very title of his work, 20 Cases Suggestive of Reincarnation, you know that this isn't a proper work of science, because no proper scientific work would use a vague, ambivalent word like suggestive, that since he personally can't think of any explanation for them, then there must necessarily be reincarnation, despite the fact that many other people can think of explanations other than reincarnation.
For some it may be obvious, I don't know, but I think especially for those who are real adamant believers in having experienced past life, which would require them being an energy inside of their body that is having a human experience and has been inside other bodies. It's kind of funny because it almost sounds kind of gross. It's like, I was in another body having another experience. Energy is released, what some people call spiritual energy or chi or the Holy Spirit or Kundalini or whatever, consciousness. Instead of projecting it out there as some sort of super force or something else, it's homegrown. The feeling of yourself in and around yourself, spiritual experience, is a homegrown energy produced by your nervous system and your brain. Alright, now having said that, let's talk reincarnation. So the belief in reincarnation is the idea that you've lived before, but in the case of the girl in the band, whom she's having a problem with, she will feel this pain, and instead of feeling it into her childhood, she may feel it, well, let me take that back. So she's feeling the pain, it's real deep pain, she doesn't know what to do with it. So as she ponders it and goes into it, imagery arises out of this pain. A scenario arises out of this pain of her living in the early 1900s or the 1700s or the, whatever. And a whole scenario happens where a guy, when she sees a figure that has the same sort of mannerisms as this man in her real life, and this man attacked her and killed her. She sees this vision, this whole, and then she feels a release inside her body. Oh my. I knew this man in a past life. What confirms the story is the release in the body. And that's key. The same with synchronicity. And I've said in prior lessons or videos, I'm not sure what to call these yet, that synchronicity is like music. it's like hitting a chord. Somebody says they believe in shape-shifting reptilians, and so they go out, I believe in shape-shifting reptilians. That's my D chord. And then they find another chord that goes with that D chord. So they meet somebody and they talk about reptilians, and this person says, I've seen people shapeshift. That's that chord. And then they go over and they see a statue. They notice this reptilian part of the statue. They go, that's the third chord. So it gives them a feeling of certainty that they're actually getting validated. Another name for this is confirmation bias. Literally, it can cause people with some really, crazy experiences and some major disappointments. So getting back to, there's a release, and so where I say it shifts off into belief stories such as reincarnation is, first of all, is when a person's feeling a lot of pain rooted in childhood, which is the last place anybody wants to go, where they are mostly vulnerable. If the pain is too intense, and these sorts of pains will last for decades, they'll feel impossible to deal with. And this is what causes people to head towards religion and head towards spirituality and head towards belief systems such as reincarnation to try to make sense of the mess, because it's too painful to feel.
I've lost my first client to suicide this last year. And this was a woman who was absolutely miserable. I am talking every moment of her life was a nightmare. And so we had that very serious sit-down talk where we had to say, all right, we're either committing or not committing to life. Because every time I gave her a suggestion, she'd stop in 2 days doing the suggestion. So then we have to ask the question, do we really want this to work? And what's interesting is when she asked herself that question, the answer was no. I'm done. So there's nothing that any healer could ever do for that type of vibration. I realized I had a choice to make. I get to either commit to death or I get to commit to life. No more being in the middle. About past lives. We are eternal beings, and so we have been projecting forth into physical life, and we've been withdrawing from physical life back to non-physical existence over and over again. For most of you, we can't even count as high as you have had past lives. But what we need to understand about past lives is that you are the culmination of all of them. When you are living your physical life, every time you experience something that you don't like, you give rise to the preference. And that preference is a vibrational set point, which you add to your greater self. Your non-physical self becomes the vibrational equivalent of that thing which you have desired.
This is what causes people to head towards religion and head towards spirituality and head towards belief systems such as reincarnation to try to make sense of the mess, because it's too painful to feel. But what they miss is the imagery that's arising from the wound, the story, okay, the imagery. It's validating their belief system. Because if a person did not believe in reincarnation, they would actually notice whatever imagery arising with them and go, I'm getting an archetype. This is Jungian. I'm getting an archetype of imagery. It's weird. It's like the scenario of being in like the 1700s. So, and I think whether one believes in reincarnation or not, the body is going to produce imagery and feeling to help move and to purge and to right itself, to tune itself from trauma. And so
the universe is trying to explore what it is. It needs to have an experience of as many perspectives as it possibly can. So you would choose to be both the butcher and the animal that's being butchered. So you may opt into an experience being an animal who's butchered in one life, and in the past life be someone who butchered animals, not because of some karmic have to, not because the universe says this is what perfection is and you have to understand this, so you have to go back to a life like this. It's because if you're trying to gain all perspectives that you can possibly gain, you would choose to understand all perspectives relative to one situation.
The hidden secret of reincarnation is to realize it is a daydream in real time happening in and around the body. So just like a dream at night, you look at a dream at night and then you don't necessarily go, well, I literally was somewhere doing, I know some people do that, but most people go, you know, it was interpreting it through Jung or Freud. I had the language of what I call the bioimagination, the language of the body, through archetypes and imagery. I had a dream last night, and then you interpret it. Well, during the day, people tend to, because they can't see their thoughts, because they're looking through them. So when someone adopts the belief of reincarnation, and then they start having these experiences, then they start taking this story, and the imagery of the story, literal. So,
express the hell out of these emotions. Expose what's going on to the light of your own consciousness and then to other people's consciousness. Express how you feel and why you feel that way. Imagine you're emotionally vomiting. 4. If you're suicidal, there's an unmet need that you're currently unaware of.
Suicidal tendencies, even if they're not suicidal. By extension then, cancer cells, according to her logic, must be some kind of squatter cells that just love to squat host bodies who are already ill with cancer-like love.
Caring more about how I felt with the minute I had in front of me than I cared about anything else. I started to make decisions in my life according to the criteria of whether it felt better, and nothing else. You're never going to make the kind of life that you want to live unless you're willing to completely commit to life itself. I rest my case. It was never, for either of you, it was never about anything other than getting people to be with you. That's it. So stop this other shit. The way to end suffering is not to go in the direction of joy.